The thing about humans, reflected Commander Vexthak as he watched his target through targeting scopes, was that they never quite died the way you expected them to. Even when you had them cornered in a collapsed archaeological dig on some forgotten moon with 3 cruiser-class ships in orbit and enough firepower to glass a small continent, they still managed to look amused. Dr. Kamal Chen crouched behind a fallen pillar of what had once been a magnificent temple, her excavation tools scattered around her like the toys of a child who'd grown bored with playing archaeologist. The ruins stretched across the moon's surface in impossible spirals, their architecture belonging to no known species in the hegemony's exhaustive databases. Which was, of course, exactly the problem. "You realize," Chen called out, her voice echoing off ancient stone, "that shooting me won't actually solve your little historical revisionism issue." Vexthak's 4 eyes narrowed in sequence, a gesture that his species used to indicate deep irritation. Through his comm, he could hear his subordinates positioning themselves around the dig site, their movements transmitted as small blips on his tactical display. 67 soldiers against 1 human with a trowel, and an inconvenient discovery. The odds should have been comforting. They weren't. "Dr. Chen," he said, activating his external speakers so his voice would carry across the ruins. "You have uncovered classified materials that threaten the stability of 17 member species. Surrender your findings, and your death will be swift." A laugh drifted from behind the pillar, the kind of sound that suggested its maker found the entire universe to be one elaborate joke. "Classified? Commander, these ruins predate your precious hegemony by about 40,000 years. Unless you're suggesting your ancestors had time travel technology, I think what you mean is inconvenient." Subcommander Irextal's voice crackled through Vexthak's private channel. "Sir, the human's equipment is still active. She's been transmitting data packets for the past 17 minutes. Jam all frequencies." "We've been trying, sir. Her transmission method. We don't recognize the technology." Of course they didn't. Humans had this delightful habit of solving problems in ways that made absolutely no sense until they worked perfectly. Vexthak had studied their military history during the war, what the hegemony now called the Human Pacification Campaign, and what humans had apparently called Tuesday. They'd had a gift for turning defeats into victories and victories into catastrophes, often simultaneously. "Dr. Chen," Vexthak called again, "your species was declared extinct 43 years ago. Officially, you don't exist. No one will mourn your passing." Another laugh. "Oh, Commander, you still don't understand, do you? That's the whole point." Movement flickered in his peripheral vision. 3 soldiers were closing in from the east. Approach. Their plasma rifles charged and ready. Vexthak had fought humans before. They were tenacious, clever, and absolutely infuriating in their refusal to follow standard tactical doctrine. But they were also mortal, and mortals could be killed. "The ruins tell quite a story," Chen continued, her voice now coming from a different position. She was moving through the archaeological site with the casual confidence of someone who'd mapped every stone. "Want to hear it? It's about a species called the Architects. Lovely people, apparently. They built these temples as, well, let's call them instruction manuals." Instruction manuals for what? How to uplift primitive civilizations into spacefaring empires. How to guide their development. How to make them believe they achieved greatness all on their own. There was a pause, and when Chen spoke again, her voice carried the particular satisfaction of a scholar who just solved a particularly elegant puzzle. The architects were quite proud of their work. 17 species, guided from barbarism to the stars over the course of millennia. They documented everything. Vexthak felt something cold settle in his primary stomach. 17 species. The exact number currently in your hegemony. What a coincidence. His tactical display showed his soldiers were in position. 3 squads, 67 of the finest warriors in the hegemony fleet, all focused on one human who was discussing ancient history as if she were giving a university lecture. Vexthak had the uncomfortable feeling that he was missing something important. Dr. Chen, step out from behind the pillar, now. One more thing, Commander. The really interesting part of the story. See, the architects didn't just guide these 17 species. They made sure each species developed certain, let's call them personality traits. The Vexhal became militaristic. The Rexians became technological specialists. The Morthan became administrators, all perfectly balanced, all designed to work together in harmony. Vexthak's soldiers were moving now, plasma rifles trained on the pillar. Standard suppression formation, by the book. Chen should have been terrified. Instead, her voice carried the warm satisfaction of someone sharing a particularly good joke. The thing is, Commander, the architects made one tiny mistake. They assumed they'd be around to see their grand experiment completed. But life has a way of throwing curveballs, doesn't it? Plagues, wars, cosmic disasters, the usual suspects. The architects died out before they could reveal themselves to their 17 pet species. Meaning what, exactly? Meaning that for 40,000 years, your precious hegemony has been following a script written by a species that's been extinct longer than your civilization has existed. You've been playing out someone else's story, thinking it was your own. The soldiers were 20 meters away now. Vexthak could see Chen's shadow moving behind the pillar. But something was wrong with the tactical picture. His soldiers were reporting multiple heat signatures, but they should have been detecting only one human. Sir, Subcommander Irextal's voice was tight with confusion. The dig site. It's more extensive than our orbital scans indicated. There are structures beneath the surface, a lot of structures. And here's the really beautiful part, Chen called out, her voice now echoing from what seemed to be underground. The architects left behind more than just temples. They left behind activation codes, genetic triggers embedded in each of the 17 species, designed to activate when they encountered the proper stimulus. Vexthak's blood chilled. What kind of stimulus? The kind that proves they're ready for the next phase of development. The kind that shows they've outgrown their original programming. Chen's laugh was genuinely delighted now. The kind that comes from discovering the truth about their own origins. His tactical display was painting an increasingly disturbing picture. The heat signatures were multiplying, and his soldiers were reporting that the ruins extended far deeper underground than anyone had suspected. Worse, they were detecting power readings, ancient systems coming online after millennia of dormancy. Dr. Chen, step out where we can see you. Oh, but Commander, I'm not Dr. Chen anymore. Haven't been for years. That identity died with the rest of my species, remember? No, I'm something much more interesting now. The shadow behind the pillar moved, and Vexthak caught a glimpse of movement that made his tactical assumptions crumble. Chen wasn't hiding. She was working. Her hands moved over what looked like a control panel carved into the ancient stone, symbols flickering to life under her touch. I'm an archaeologist, Commander. Do you know what archaeologists do? We dig things up. We bring the past back to life. And sometimes, if we're very good at our jobs, we resurrect entire civilizations. The ground began to vibrate. Deep beneath the surface, something vast and ancient was awakening. The transmission, Vexthak said, understanding flooding through him with horrible clarity. You weren't just sending data. No, Chen agreed cheerfully. I was sending activation codes to 17 different worlds, to 17 different species, to genetic triggers that have been dormant for 40,000 years. His soldiers opened fire. The pillar exploded in a shower of ancient stone and superheated plasma. But Chen was no longer behind it. She was standing in the center of the temple complex, her hands still moving over control surfaces that hadn't been touched since before his species had developed agriculture. You see, Commander, the architects didn't really die out. They just transformed, became something new, something better, something that could guide the next phase of galactic evolution. She looked up at him, and Vexthak saw something in her, eyes that made him understand why humans had never quite died the way you expected them to. She was smiling. They became human. The explosion, when it came, was beautiful in its completeness. It consumed the temple, the dig site, Dr. Chen, and 43 of Vexthak's finest soldiers in a ball of brilliant white light that could be seen from orbit. The remaining soldiers, including Vexthak himself, were far enough away to survive, which was, he realized much later, probably intentional. As his ship's medical bay treated his radiation burns, and his communication officers tried to make sense of the garbled transmissions coming from 17 different star systems, Vexthak found himself thinking about that smile. Humans, he reflected, never quite died the way you expected them to, especially when they were the ones who pulled the trigger. 6 months after the incident on Kepler 442b, Information Minister Thaindok discovered that managing a galactic empire's public relations was significantly more difficult when half your member species were experiencing what could only be described as evolutionary hiccups. The morning briefing in his crystalline office aboard Hegemony Central Command had devolved into what his personal assistant charitably called a passionate exchange of viewpoints, and what Thaindok privately termed bureaucratic pandemonium, with a side of species-wide identity crisis. The Morthan Collective is demanding access to their pre-hegemony historical archives, announced Deputy Minister Kelevich, her chitinous shell clicking with agitation. Archives that officially don't exist. Because they burned them during the Unification Wars, replied Senior Analyst Dexmar, his gelatinous form pulsing with what passed for exasperation among his people. We have the footage. Very inspiring stuff about embracing the future and abandoning primitive superstitions. Thaindok rubbed his temples with 2 of his 6 hands, while using the other 4 to manipulate holographic data streams. The numbers were not encouraging. 17 different species, all experiencing simultaneous cultural renaissance movements that bore uncomfortable similarities to rebellion. The timing was suspicious. The coordination was impossible to ignore, and the transmissions from that damned archaeological site kept echoing in his nightmares. What about the Rexians? He asked, dreading the answer. They've locked themselves in their technology centers, Kelevich reported, claim they're investigating anomalous genetic markers that appeared in their population after the Kepler incident. Their tech priests are calling it the Great Remembering. Catchy, muttered Dexmar. The Zephyrians went with the awakening of ancient truths. Less poetic, but points for clarity. Thaindok pulled up a holographic map of hegemony space. 17 worlds, each marked with increasingly urgent status reports. Riots on Morthan Prime, technology blackouts on Erexia. The Kaisuru, normally docile Cathari, had established meditation camps that looked suspiciously like military training facilities. Sir, Kelevich's voice carried the particular tone that meant she was about to deliver catastrophically bad news. We've intercepted communications suggesting that these developments aren't random. Define not random. Coordinated, planned, there are references to activation protocols and phase transitions in the encrypted channels. And sir, the encryption methods don't match any known hegemony technology. Of course they didn't. Thaindok had been information minister for 37 years, and he'd learned to recognize the particular flavor of disaster that came from underestimating extinct species. The humans had been officially dead for 4 decades, but their fingerprints were all over this crisis. Show me the intercepts. The holographic display shifted, revealing fragments of communications between rebel cells across multiple star systems. The translations were rough, but the meaning was clear enough to make Thaindok's primary heart skip several beats. Sector 7 reporting successful awakening. Gene locks disengaged, accessing pre-integration memories. The Builder's legacy lives. We remember what we were before the chains. Phase 2 protocols active. The sleepers are awakening. Dexmar's gelatinous form had shifted to a distinctly worried shade of purple. Sir, about the humans. What about them? They're extinct. We have documentation. Well, yes, but the documentation is inconsistent. Thaindok felt the familiar weight of administrative dread settling on his shoulders. Elaborate. The military reports from the human pacification campaign don't match the official historical records at all. Dexmar's form pulsed nervously. I've been cross-referencing the sealed files, and there are some rather glaring discrepancies. Such as the fact that every single major battle with humans ended with the humans achieving their strategic objectives, even when they technically lost the engagement. Kelovich's shell clicking intensified. That's impossible. Military defeats don't achieve strategic objectives. Unless, Dexmar said quietly, the strategic objectives weren't what we thought they were. The holographic display shifted again, showing battle reports from the human wars. Thaindok had seen the sanitized versions in the official histories. Glorious victories, noble conquests, the inevitable triumph of civilization over primitive chaos. But these raw military files told a different story entirely. Battle of Proxima Station, Dexmar continued. Official record. Hegemony forces destroyed human fleet, captured strategic position. Military record. Humans evacuated civilian population, demolished military infrastructure, and transmitted unknown data packets to 17 different coordinates before surrendering. Battle of New Geneva. Official record. Human resistance crushed. Planet pacified. Military record. Humans detonated their own cities, destroying all cultural and technological archives, while simultaneously broadcasting cultural preservation data to undisclosed recipients. Thaindok was beginning to understand why his predecessor had retired early to a meditation colony on the Rim worlds. Continue. The final engagement, Earth itself. Official record. Glorious victory. Human species eliminated as threat to galactic peace. Military record, ... Dexmar paused, his form shifting to an even more worried shade. Military record suggests the humans destroyed their own planet. Suicide? Sacrifice. The energy release from Earth's destruction created a communications pulse that reached every corner of the galaxy. The humans called it the final broadcast. Kelovich had stopped clicking entirely, which among her species indicated either deep thought or mortal terror. They were never trying to win the war. No, Thaindok said slowly, pieces of a horrifying puzzle falling into place. They were trying to distribute something, and they used our entire military campaign as a delivery system. The implications were staggering. 40 years of hegemony expansion, of bringing civilization to primitive species, of carefully managed cultural integration, all of it potentially orchestrated by a species that had allowed itself to be destroyed, rather than risk direct confrontation. Sir, Kelovich said carefully, if the humans planned this, if they've been guiding the development of the 17 species for decades, what happens next? Before Thaindok could answer, every communication console in the room activated simultaneously. The voice that emerged was distinctly human, speaking in perfect hegemony standard, with just a hint of amusement. Information Minister Thaindok, I believe you have some questions about our little archaeological discovery. Fortunately, we have answers. Unfortunately for you, The answers are going to change everything you thought you knew about the nature of galactic civilization. The transmission cut out, leaving the three of them staring at communication equipment that should have been impossible to hack, delivering a message from a species that should have been impossible to contact. Thanedoc reached for his emergency protocols, then stopped. If the humans were still out there, if they had been manipulating events for 40 years, if they had somehow turned the hegemony's greatest victory into their own strategic masterpiece, what was the point of emergency protocols against an enemy who had spent 4 decades making their extinction look like an accident? "Kelevich," he said finally, "cancel my appointments, all of them, for the next few months." "Sir? What was the point of emergency protocols against an enemy who had spent 4 decades making their extinction look like an accident?" "Kelevich," he said finally, "cancel my appointments. All of them. For the next few months, sir." "I have the horrible feeling," Thanedoc said, settling back into his chair, "that we're about to discover what happens when you think you've killed something that was never really alive in the first place." Retired General Vorthkem had spent 18 years trying to forget the sound human children made when they laughed. It wasn't the laughter itself that haunted him. It was the fact that they'd been laughing while his orbital bombardment reduced their cities to radioactive glass. The journalist sitting across from him in the dingy cafe on Terminus Station clearly didn't understand what she was asking for. Nixara Vel was young, ambitious, and possessed of the particularly dangerous combination of intelligence and naivety that made for either brilliant reporting or spectacular catastrophe. Given the subject matter, Vorthkem suspected it would be both. "General, the public deserves to know what really happened during the human pacification campaign." Vorthkem studied his drink, a local concoction that tasted like regret and burned like shame. Perfect for this conversation. "The public knows what happened. We won. Humanity lost. The galaxy became peaceful and prosperous. Except for the 17 simultaneous uprisings, the genetic anomalies, and the fact that our greatest military victory apparently triggered a galactic identity crisis." Nixara leaned forward, her recording device glinting between them like a small silver accusation. "People are asking questions, General. Hard questions. People ask questions when they don't like the answers they already have. So give me better answers." Vorthkem laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "Better answers. You have no idea what you're asking for." He took another sip of his drink, letting the burn remind him that some pain was earned. "Fine. You want the truth? The truth is that we never fought the humans. Not really." Nixara's manipulator appendages twitched, a telltale sign of excitement among her species. "What do you mean?" "I mean that every engagement, every battle, every so-called victory we achieved against humanity was orchestrated by the humans themselves. We weren't conquerors. We were actors in a play we didn't know we were performing. That's impossible. The casualty reports, the destruction... Oh, the destruction was real enough. The humans made sure of that. They had to sell the performance after all." Vorthkem pulled up a holographic display from his personal files, images that had been classified for 40 years. "Look at this. Battle of Titan. We lost 3 dreadnoughts taking a mining station that turned out to be completely automated." The hologram showed the aftermath of the engagement. Twisted metal, floating debris, and the distinctive energy signatures of human defensive systems that had fought with mathematical precision rather than desperate fury. The humans evacuated the station 3 days before we arrived. They left behind defensive drones programmed to put up exactly enough resistance to make our victory look costly but inevitable. Vorthkem manipulated the display, showing tactical analyses that had been buried in classified files. Every shot placement, every defensive pattern, it was choreographed. But why? If they were going to lose anyway, Because they weren't losing, they were graduating. Forthcam closed the holographic display with more force than necessary. Do you know what I found in the ruins of New Geneva after we conquered it? Nixara shook her head. A library. Not just any library. A genetic library. Biological samples, cultural data, psychological profiles, technological specifications. Everything you'd need to rebuild a civilization from scratch. And it wasn't just human civilization they'd cataloged. The journalist's recording device hummed quietly between them, capturing words that would reshape the understanding of galactic history, if anyone was brave enough to broadcast them. 17 species, Miss Vell. 17 complete biological and cultural profiles, stored in crystalline matrices that could survive planetary bombardment. They'd been studying us for centuries, learning everything about how we thought, how we fought, how we organized our societies. You're saying they planned their own extinction? I'm saying they planned their own transformation. The humans didn't become extinct. They became us. All of us. Forthcom's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Have you ever wondered why the hegemony formed so quickly after the human wars? Why 17 species that had been fighting each other for millennia suddenly discovered the benefits of cooperation? Nixara's skin had shifted to the pale green that indicated deep unease among her people. The integration protocols. They were presented by the Morthan. Were they? Or were they presented by humans wearing Morthan faces, using Morthan psychology, speaking in ways that would make perfect sense to Morthan cultural patterns? Forthcom pulled out another file, this one from his personal collection rather than official military records. I kept trophies from the war, souvenirs. This one came from the human commander of the Proxima Defense Fleet. He placed a small device on the table, crystalline, elegant, and humming with barely contained energy. It's a genetic sequencer. Specifically, it's designed to identify and modify biological markers that control psychological development, social behavior, and species-specific cognitive patterns. Genetic modification isn't possible with our technology, but it was possible with theirs. Forthcom activated the device, and holographic DNA strands appeared above the table, rotating slowly in the dim light of the cafe. They didn't just study us, Miss Vell. They improved us. The DNA patterns were complex beyond anything in the hegemony's scientific databases, but even Nixara could see the modifications, subtle alterations that enhanced cooperation, reduced aggression, increased intellectual capacity. The kind of changes that would make 17 warring species suddenly capable of forming a peaceful galactic alliance. Every species in the hegemony carries these modifications now. They've been breeding true for 3 generations, getting stronger with each reproductive cycle. We thought we were experiencing natural evolution, the normal progression of civilized development. But it was artificial. Guided, planned, implemented through a 40-year campaign that we mistook for a war. Forthcom deactivated the device, plunging the table back into shadow. The humans didn't lose the war, Miss Vell. They won it so completely that we don't even realize we're living in their victory. Nixara sat in stunned silence for several minutes, processing implications that stretched across decades of accepted history. When she spoke again, her voice was barely audible. The uprisings, the genetic anomalies, the awakening. Phase 2. The humans spent 40 years letting us believe we'd conquered them while they rewrote our entire species from the genetic level up. Now that the modifications are fully integrated, now that we've become what they wanted us to become, they're ready for the next phase. Which is... Forthcom finished his drink and stood, leaving payment on the table in the form of a credit chip that contained enough funds to ensure Nixara could disappear if she needed to. Given what she now knew, she probably would. That, Miss Vell, is the question that's going to keep you awake for the rest of your life. Because if the humans were capable of this, If they could orchestrate their own extinction, manipulate 17 species into forming a galactic alliance, and spend 40 years rewriting our biology to make us into better versions of ourselves, then what they're planning next is going to make everything we've experienced look like a warm-up exercise. He paused at the cafe's exit, looking back at the young journalist who was staring at the recording device as if it contained a live explosive. One piece of advice, Miss Vell. When you broadcast this story, and you will broadcast it, because that's what journalists do, remember that the humans have been 3 steps ahead of us for 40 years. Whatever reaction you think this revelation will cause, whatever chaos you think it will unleash, they've already planned for it. How can you be sure? Vorthchem smiled, and for the first time in 18 years, it held genuine warmth rather than bitter irony. Because they taught me to think this way, all of us. We're not just genetically modified, Miss Vell. We're psychologically enhanced. Every strategic decision we make, every tactical choice, every logical conclusion we reach, it's all following patterns they implanted in our minds decades ago. He walked out into the corridor of Terminus Station, leaving behind a journalist who was beginning to understand that the story she'd been chasing wasn't about the past at all. It was about a future that had been inevitable from the moment the first human ship had appeared in hegemony space, smiling and asking politely if anyone wanted to play a game. The emergency session of the Hegemony Council convened at 0400 Standard Time, because apparently galactic crises didn't respect normal business hours. Fleet Admiral Keithson observed the 17 species representatives with the detached fascination of someone watching a controlled demolition in slow motion. The Morthan delegation was arguing with themselves, literally. Half of their collective consciousness wanted to maintain existing power structures, while the other half insisted they should return to their ancestral homeworlds and rediscover forgotten wisdom traditions. The resulting internal debate sounded like a philosophical treatise being written by committee during an earthquake. The data streams are conclusive, announced Representative Zekmani of the Eurexian Technology Conclave, his cybernetic implants flickering with processed information. Cross-referencing genetic markers, psychological profiles, and historical patterns reveals statistical impossibilities that can only be explained by external guidance. External guidance is a diplomatic way of saying manipulation, snapped Council Chair Femthula, her crystalline form refracting the chamber's lights into prismatic warnings. What we're discussing is the systematic subversion of 17 independent civilizations. Admiral Kithson almost laughed. Independence, as if any of them had been independent since the moment humans had first appeared in their respective star systems, offering friendship and cultural exchange with the enthusiasm of traveling salespeople hawking enlightenment. The holographic communication array activated without authorization, displaying a transmission source that every sensor in the chamber identified as simultaneously everywhere and nowhere. When the human appeared, because of course it was a human, he looked exactly like what Central Casting would order if they needed someone to play benevolent galactic mastermind. Good morning, Council. Sorry about the early hour, but we're operating on a rather tight schedule. The human's voice carried the casual authority of someone who'd been planning this conversation for 40 years. I'm Dr. Marcus Webb, and I suppose you could call me humanity's project manager for this particular initiative. The silence that followed was the kind that typically preceded either surrender or war declarations. Given recent revelations, it was probably both. Dr. Webb. Chair Femthula's voice could have cut crystal. You represent a species that was declared extinct 4 decades ago. Extinct is such a limiting term. We prefer strategically distributed. Much more accurate, really. Webb gestured to something off-screen, and new holographic displays materialized throughout the chamber. You see, extinction assumes that a species stops existing. What actually happened is that we stopped existing as humans and started existing as something much more interesting. The displays showed genetic distribution patterns across 17 worlds, psychological development curves, technological advancement trajectories, and social evolution models. Every line converged on the same point. Now, behold the Echo Protocol, Webb continued with obvious pride. 40 years of careful cultivation, and you've all finally reached the developmental stage where we can reveal the next phase of the project. Representative Vashkol of the Zephyrian Trade Federation had been notably quiet throughout the session, but now his voice carried the particular tension of someone who'd just realized they were standing in a minefield. Project? Galactic Transcendence. Evolution beyond single-species limitations. The creation of a truly cooperative interstellar civilization. Webb's smile was warm, genuine, and absolutely terrifying in its implications. You didn't think the hegemony formed by accident, did you? 17 species, each with perfectly complementary strengths and weaknesses, all deciding to work together immediately after a devastating war? That's not politics. That's engineering. Admiral Kithson found his voice. You're saying you designed us. Enhanced you. There's a difference. We simply encouraged certain beneficial traits while discouraging others. Increased empathy, enhanced logical reasoning, improved pattern recognition, better impulse control. The kind of modifications that turn warring primitives into collaborative galactic citizens. The Morthan Collective had stopped arguing with itself and was now generating what could only be described as a harmonic hum of existential crisis. The Cathari representatives were meditating so intensely that the air around them had begun to shimmer. 3 other delegations were having quiet, nervous breakdowns in their respective languages. The uprisings, Chair Femthula said slowly. The genetic anomalies. The awakening. Graduation ceremonies. When a species reaches sufficient development, the dormant programming activates and they begin remembering their true potential. It's a beautiful process, really, like watching children discover they can fly. Dr. Webb manipulated his off-screen controls, and the holographic displays shifted to show current status reports from across hegemony space. Every world was experiencing some form of transformation. Not chaos, but organized evolution guided by principles that were becoming clear for the first time. But here's the truly elegant part, Webb continued, his enthusiasm growing. None of you have to choose between your current identity and your enhanced capabilities. You get to keep being yourselves, just better. The Vexhal remain militaristic, but now your strategic thinking includes long-term galactic stability. The Erexians remain technological, specialists, but your innovations consider the welfare of all species. The Morthan remain excellent administrators, but your bureaucracy actually serves the common good. Representative Dexmel from the Hegemony Science Directorate had been frantically calculating something on his personal datapad. When he looked up, his gelatinous form had shifted to a distinctly worried shade of purple. Dr. Webb, the energy requirements for this level of biological and psychological modification across 17 species would be enormous. How did you… You're wondering about the power source. Excellent question. Webb's expression shifted to something that might have been sadness if it weren't quite so satisfied. Do you remember what happened to Earth? The chamber fell silent. Everyone remembered Earth. The final battle, the planetary destruction, the energy pulse that had been visible from 3 star systems away. We didn't destroy our homeworld out of spite or desperation. We converted it. An entire planet's mass energy, carefully channeled through quantum resonance networks we'd been building for centuries. Enough power to reach every inhabited world in the galaxy simultaneously and implement the most comprehensive genetic enhancement project in cosmic history. Admiral Kithson felt something fundamental shift in his understanding of the universe. You committed species suicide to power a galactic evolution program. We committed species transcendence. Humans as you knew us ceased to exist, but humanity as a concept expanded to encompass 17 different expressions of consciousness, each one perfect for its role in a larger symphony. Webb gestured to the assembled delegates. Ladies, gentlemen, and distinguished collective entities, you are humanity now. All of you. Every species, every world, every individual consciousness that carries our enhancements is a continuation of what we began on a small blue planet 40 millennia ago. The implications were staggering. 17 species, billions of individuals, all carrying modified genetic patterns that made them more cooperative, more intelligent, more capable of working together toward common goals. A galactic civilization designed and implemented by a species that had sacrificed its individual existence to create something immeasurably larger. So what happens now? Chair Femthula asked, her crystalline form dimming with uncertainty. Now you do what you were always going to do. You explore, you learn, you grow, you reach out to the next wave of developing species and offer them the same gift we offered you. The cycle continues, consciousness expands, and the universe becomes a little more interesting with each generation. Webb began to fade as the transmission prepared to end, but his voice remained clear. Oh, and council? You might want to prepare for visitors. There are approximately 47 species in the neighboring galactic arms that have reached the preliminary development stage. They'll be arriving for first contact within the next few decades, and they're going to need guidance. The transmission cut out, leaving 17 species representatives staring at empty air and processing the reality that their entire civilization had been one elaborate graduation exercise designed by cosmic educators who had literally given their lives to create better students. Admiral Kithson looked around the chamber at his colleagues, Morthan administrators, Erexian technologists, Zephyrian traders, all of them unknowingly carrying the genetic and psychological legacy of a species that had transformed extinction into immortality. The humans, he realized, had indeed fired the last shot of their war, and every trigger pulled since then had been guided by their invisible hands.